How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to Voro Motors. I'm AJ Hart, here today with another guide to maintain your ride. For today's video, I'm going to be doing a video on our Touring light replacement. So let's say that you're riding around and you notice that your deck lights are going out on one of the 4 spots on the Touring. So we need to replace those lights. When you need these lights replaced, we're actually not replacing just the light. It's a lot easier to just replace the whole fender. So we're going to be doing a guide on how to replace the entire fender on the left and right side. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to go ahead and replace both sides, but for you, you maybe only need to replace the left or the right side. Let's say that you don't need to deal with the side that has all of the charging ports, and you just need to do it on the off side. This guide's going to help you get to that as well, but it's going to be kind of buried within this video, so I do advise that you watch this thing throughout. Also, for the purposes of this job, a list of tools that I used is, of course, the Allen wrench set. I used a small dead blow hammer. I used needle nose pliers, and I used a pair of scissors, like itty bitty teeny tiny ones, and some electrical tape. Now this is a really easy job, but it does take a little bit of time and a little bit of patience to get it all done. For me personally, it took me about 30 minutes to get both of these swapped. But if you're only swapping one side, it's probably going to be much easier, especially if you're replacing the side that does not have all of the electrical ports. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into this video and get you in and out.
Now the very first thing that needs to happen is a small adjustment to one of our cables. If you look at the new fender with the charger and power button, you'll see 2 cables with exposed ends coming from the power button itself. You should have had a pin sent to you along with this piece. We need to make sure that this pin is on that red cable. The pin should have 2 sets of metal arms, the lower of which we want to hug the red cable, just near the top. Seat the cable and pin like so, then take a pair of needle nose pliers and squeeze those arms down and around the cable. Make sure to make a nice hold. Now those little arms should sit around the wires. Squeeze those smaller arms around those nice and tight as well. Once we have a tight squeeze on the cable and wires, we need to cut the excess off. So fold those wires down, grab a pair of scissors, and cut those off. I'm going to give it one last squeeze to push down those ends just to be safe. Now that the pin is on the cable, we can take advantage of that later. To start this job for real, fold the scooter down so we can get to the front plate. We need to get into that controller, so remove all 4 of these screws and then pull the front plate away. Now that we've popped the hood, let's pull the cable and controller out. As with all these electrical jobs, we need to unplug the sparking bits first. Make sure that you wear gloves when you do this, unlike yours truly. Start with this large yellow connector, since that's the battery. Then we can unplug the yellow, green, and blue motor connections. Next, we need to unplug the charger, especially if you are replacing the charger side of these lights. If you're only replacing one side, then you may not need to unplug this charger, but for this job, I will be replacing both. So look in, and you should see this red connection. Reach in and yank that out. And again, if you are replacing the charger side, you need to unplug this connector that goes from black and red to blue and red. Squeeze the pin on top and pull the connector apart. Now that these have been unplugged, let's go ahead and remove all 3 of these screws and drop the fender. This is something you'll need to do whether you're replacing the left or right side lights. When you drop it down, you'll see a nest of cables here, and those are all of our light connectors. There's a little rut here that the rear light cable runs through, but all of our lights connect here. Make sure that you keep that cable running through that rut. We're going to come back to this in a moment. Since we're replacing this fender, we need to pull all of these cables free. First, let's pull out the charger and give ourselves some wiggle room. Next, we need to pull out the power button cable. But you'll see they're still connected on the inside. First, we need to push the pin in this connector out and free the red cable. The pin on the inside there has a small hook that we need to push down to get the cable out. So take a small thin tool, a tweezer for example, and push that pin down so that you can make that pin free. We need to be careful not to break the connector itself. Make sure not to force anything, as we will be plugging the next pin back into this connector. There we go, nice and free. As for the black cable, you should see it come to this sleeve. Grab those scissors again and cut that sleeve off. Then you'll see that the black cable is twisted up with this red one. Go ahead and untwist those to free our black cable. Now both of these cables are free and come right out. Now we've almost got this fender out and replaced. The last thing we need to do is replace the whole reason why we started this job in the first place. Grab your new fender and put it next to the old one. This lets us unplug our old light cables without losing our spots. First, unplug the rear light of the old fender. And then plug in the new one. Make sure to match the arrows and pins on the inside so you don't break anything. Then we can unplug and swap the front light. Now the old fender is out forever and we can move on. But hey, let's say that you're just looking to replace the empty fender for now, or maybe even as well. That is a much easier job. Just remove these 3 screws on the side and drop the fender down. Once it's down, we can take our new fender and feed the light cables through the same hole that the old lights currently go through. Push them into the deck and out to the other side. Now that the plugs are on the side with the connectors, unplug one of the old lights and plug in the matching color. Make sure to line up the arrows and then do the same with the next light. Now you can pull the old fender and lights out and off. Now that all the lights are replaced, we can go ahead and start putting it all back together. Let's start by feeding the charging port back into the deck, followed by the power button cables. Then try to feed as much of the cable through that hole as we can. Make sure that that rear light does run through that little rut in the fender there, because we need to reseat this thing and having that cable out of the way helps. The cables here can be pretty tight, so reseating them may take time. It's a bit of a process, but we need to make sure that all of the cable is squeezed in here without any of the cables being in the way of that screw hole. Once the screw is in, we can tighten down the rest of the fender. Now that the fender is on, we can go back to the front and deal with our electrical plugs. Remember how we put that pin on the red cable? Well, it's finally time to put it to use. Hunt down that black connector with the blue cable and place the red cable into that connector next to the blue. Make sure that the pin is pointing towards the lever on the connector. Now, my pin housing itself had a bit of an issue plugging into the connector the first time because I squeezed it a little bit too flat. So I took my pliers and squeezed it from the sides to make my pin base a little bit more narrow so it could fit into the connector. Moving on to that exposed red cable from before, we need to twist that back together with our black cable. Just lay them over each other like an X and start twisting. Once you've twisted them together, push them down against the cable and grab some electrical tape. Wrap a bit of that tape around the bond you just made to help keep that connection sturdy. Now we can get on with putting this all back together. Place the 3 screws back into the side fender and tighten them down in no time. As for the front, we'll start by plugging in the charging port. Now that plug is kind of deep in there, so plugging it in can be a pain, but with some patience and a pair of pliers, I'm sure you can get it. Now we will move on and plug our motor in. Blue to blue, green to green, and yellow to yellow. Next, we'll plug in that red and blue cable pair into the black and red connections coming out of the controller. Red runs into the red, and blue runs into the black. Finally, let's plug that battery back in. Luckily, I found some gloves just before this part, but we do recommend using gloves the whole time you do an electrical job. Now that it's all plugged in again, let's press the power button on the lights to make sure it all turns back on. Looks great! We're coming down on the final stretch. Just shove all of the cables and the controller back into this cubby. Don't be afraid to give it a couple love taps to make sure it fits all in there. Once it's seated enough for your screws to grab, just tighten down all 4 of these screws, and the job is all wrapped up.
And there we have it. We've replaced both side fenders on the Touring and as such replaced the lights for this job. Smooth as can be. A little bit more difficult when we get inside with that electrical stuff, but it's nothing that you can't handle with a pair of needle nose pliers and some scissors and some electrical tape. With that being said, that's going to be where I go ahead and leave today's video. As always, if you have any questions or concerns that came up with your scooter while you were doing this job, by all means leave those in the comments down below. If you have any ideas for other videos you'd like to see us do, go ahead and drop those in the comments down below as well. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope that this video helps, and I hope you enjoy your ride.